Hello guys and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you another battle group overview, this time of the 91st Luftlande. And well, what I'm going to be doing is going through each of the tabs, recon, infantry, tank and so on. And I'm going to be talking through how each units complement themselves towards the end of the video. So let's start off with recon. So jumping straight in. First of all, I have the two squads of Speertrupp coming in the Kubels. Now these are 2-star veterancy squads, and they do have the FG-42. It has a 300 meter range, and with the 2-star veterancy can be quite efficient at taking out enemy infantry. However, the best thing about these Speertrupp is they're relatively cheap, 30 points, same sort of price as an Aufklärer, and they're 4-man squads as opposed to 2-man squads. Furthermore, they have very high optics. Now the Aufklärer also have very high optics, and they do come with a Kubel MG, which can be useful in certain situations. I find the Speertrupp pretty damn good, especially for like even being put in towns. Like 4-man squad, it can tear apart enemy infantry, especially with that experience. Furthermore, I've also got the 2 cards of the Panzer Abwehr with the Panzerschreck squads. Now again, these are fantastic at close range. They have 4 MP40s. If you come into a 100 meter range of an enemy infantry squad with 2-star veterancy, these things can like rip apart even like a 12-man rifle squad from the 2nd Infantry. So that's just something to bear in mind. But generally, they are great because they have the very high optics as well as that Panzerschreck, and they're able to just sneak around with a very good stealth and pick off those enemy units quite nicely. And that's what I'd use these for. And I would recommend maybe bringing in a couple of these at the beginning of the game. Now, as we look at the other units in this tab, you've got more Aufklärer with the Kubel MG. If you want to have the Kubel MG for the frontline presence next to your recon, then feel free. Definitely a chance to swap out one of the Speertrupp from one of the Aufklärer in Phase A, for example. You can also maybe choose to bring in the BMW R75 with the machine gun. This is something that you might be able to choose. You might want to choose to do just to give you some mobile recon, although the optics are only high on this vehicle. Then moving on, we do get the Fusilier squads. Now these are a very high optics infantry squad, which is actually relatively good for Phase B. You could definitely maybe swap out one of these for the Speertrupp from Phase A, and you get yourself a machine gun, you get yourself an AT weapon at close range, 100 meter range AT grenade, and yeah, absolutely fantastic. I think that's the H3, yep, anti-tank grenade, so definitely a squad to consider. However, I don't find that I use them enough to bring them in. But some people do rate them quite highly, especially with their strength of 9, which is actually really nice for a recon squad. Moving on to infantry, I have 2 cards of Ersatztruppen in Phase A. Now, Ersatztruppen aren't fantastic by any means. They generally get pinned down very easily. They have the disheartened trait, which basically means that their morale is terrible, and they take plus 25% suppression damage compared to regular troops, which yeah, basically means they're pretty useless. Don't let them get caught out in the open. However, they are fantastic for holding positions on the front line. So if you spread them out and just like put them in random locations, maybe even put them on returned fire, they can be quite nice for just holding the front line and maybe pushing the front line in places where there aren't enemy units. Furthermore, they can be relatively useful in buildings. So if you get them into buildings and have them fighting across buildings, they can also be useful in that respect too. Definitely want them to be upvetted though by a nearby command unit. Otherwise they're not going to do too much damage. They have 8 Kar 98s. And yeah, nothing special, but for 10 points each, probably the biggest sort of benefit of having these is that they are only 10 points each, and therefore you can use quite a lot of them. So bringing them in at the start of the game supported by a Fallschirmführer is quite a good idea. So I have the Fallschirmführer in Phase A. These guys come in the Kubel. They have 2 FG-42s along with a H3 AT grenade. These guys are relatively good in combat. However, you want to be keeping these guys relatively safe and pushing the front line with your Ersatztruppen and your Fallschirmjägers. So yeah, the Fallschirmjäger or the Fallschirmführer is here to just buff your friendly infantry, and that's why I've got them early on. And they're 20-point squads, very, very nice for 2-star veterancy. And then we've got the MG34. These aren't vetted up, unfortunately, but they do have a 9 HE power machine gun. Generally, these are brought in quite a lot at the beginning of the game. I see people tend to go for all 3 of these, like bring in all 3 from one card at the start, because they can provide great suppressive fire for your infantry, and if they're buffed up to 1-star veterancy, they do even better. So that's fantastic. You can maybe choose to take in 2 cards of MG34s instead of an extra card of Ersatztruppen. That's definitely something that you could consider, for example, like that. However, I much prefer to have the Ersatztruppen just for the extra presence. Now, furthermore, in Phase 8, you definitely want to be bringing in both your squads of Fallschirmjägers. These 2 cards are probably the most important for this tab. You want both of them. Now, they have a lovely 2-star veterancy, and all of their weapons have at least 300-meter range. So they have the FG-42, they have the G-43, and the MG-34, which they have 2 of, and the Panzerfaust. And therefore, any infantry squad that gets into range of these and is left in the open will die exceptionally quickly. Because the majority of squads, for example, tend to have like MP40s or, you know, like short-range submachine guns in their squads, so not the entire squad is firing at the same time. Whereas with the Fallschirmjäger, what's so fantastic about them is they have 300-meter range on all of their light weapons. It makes them incredibly effective for chewing up enemy infantry. 2-star veterancy turns to 3 with a Fallschirmführer next to them as well. Makes them even more accurate than they already are. And the 7 accuracy on both their G43 and the FG42 is just exceptional. So there you go. Definitely want both of these squads. So moving on to Phase B, I do have the Pioneerführer. Now these guys are, okay. I take them over the Grenführer because the Grenführer has a smoke grenade as opposed to the 22 AP bar HE grenade. So that means that the Pioneerführer can actually look after itself against enemy infantry quite nicely. It can definitely blow up entire squads on its own, as long as it doesn't get pinned down quickly because of its 4 strength. The Grenführer is good if you just want to keep the command infantry alive, but at this point you should probably still have your Fallschirmführer squads, and then you're just going to be bringing in the Pioneerführer just to back up your other pushes. Now moving on, we have Grenadiers, multiple types of Grenadiers, Pioneers and Sturm Pioneers. So these Grenadiers, they have the MP40, 7 cars and a MG. They're okay, you get 6 of them for 25 points and they come in the KFZ 70. However, what I opt for is 1 card of the Grenadiers with the Panzerfaust. So these Grenadiers are basically exactly the same as the others, but one of the squads comes with the Panzerfaust. And I find the Panzerfaust extremely useful for certain situations. Where I don't need a Panzerfaust, instead of choosing the normal Grenadier squads, I choose the Pioneers, because Pioneers are much better for anti-infantry than the standard Grenadiers. They are 5 points more expensive, but this 22 AP power or HE power AT grenade, definitely useful. Now some people rate these Sturm Pioneers with the 100-meter range flamethrower, and they can be very useful for towns and close range forest engagements. However, I don't particularly find napalm incredibly useful in this game. Now the thing to note about napalm is that it can be used on the move in this game. I believe that flamethrowers can fire on the move, which is something that you might be able to exploit. So definitely be aware of that, and I would maybe recommend swapping out the Pioneers for the Sturm Pioneers if you're thinking of changing things out. 6-man squad is actually pretty decent for a napalm infantry squad. So yeah, definitely something to maybe try out if you want to. Moving on to the tank tab. This is something that has been baffling me for quite a while. I'm not entirely sure what sort of tank tab I want with this deck. However, I have opted currently for the 4 Panzer 35Rs in Phase A, and the reason I chose these was because they are cheap. They are incredibly cheap, 55 points, and they do provide that much needed close range fire support for infantry at a cheap cost. Now there is of course the Panzer 39, which comes with a 5 AP power main gun, but you're paying an extra 15 points for that 1 AP power. And in some cases that does make a difference, especially against the M5A1s and the Honey Stewarts, for example. But in general, Panzer 35 is just there to provide that tank support where you need it for a relatively cheap cost. Now moving into Phase B, you can get more of these Panzer 39s if you need to, but it kind of feels like a bit of a waste of a card. Possibly bringing in the Panzer III is an option. 90.8 AP 6 armor tank is not too bad, and it does have 2 machine guns and provides the veteran CT unit surrounding it. That's a quite decent value for money tank. However, it just doesn't stand up to much of Phase B armor in this game. So generally what I do is opt for a Phase B Stug 3. And this has 14 AP power and 10 front armor. And basically the reason that I take this is because it allows you to almost recover like a Phase B if your Phase A hasn't gone very well. You're being overrun by maybe half tracks or enemy light tanks. Then a Stug 3 should be able to stem that tide quite nicely. So definitely worth having one of these in Phase B just to hold things off if it's getting a bit sticky. Now moving into Phase C, well, you can get even more Stugs now. You can get cards of 3 Stugs. But I find that the Stug 3 with the 2-star veterancy, as long as you don't get it 1-popped, is a very nice addition to this deck. Having that 2-star veterancy, which then can be made into a 3-star Stug, is extremely useful in certain situations. You'd need to keep them nearby your command infantry, since I don't actually have any command tanks. However, you can also use commands from... I thought they had a command support unit, but they don't. So yeah, you just have to keep them by command infantry in order to get that +3, which isn't too bad because generally you use the Stug 3 quite defensively. That's pretty much my tank tab. There's not too much to talk about in this one. It's really like the opting for the Panzer 39 over the Panzer 35, or if you want maybe both the Panzer 39 and Panzer 35 and maybe take away the Stug from Phase C, for example, or something like that, because generally you're going to be very weak in Phase C anyway. As we move on to the support tab, I definitely take cue ball munitions in Phase A. They only have 5,000 supply each, compared to the 10,000 supply of the Opel Blitz. However, Phase A supply is definitely needed, so I tend to bring these in. And it's actually quite nice to have them, the munitions spread between 3 different vehicles sometimes. I don't bring in the Flammenwerfers just because they're a 2-man squad and they will get shot up very quickly. I also don't bring in the IGs just because I haven't found them to be incredibly useful. They are great for pinning down enemy infantry, but you need to have line of sight because they're a direct fire artillery piece. As we move on to Phase B, I do take the Stür 42, and that's just, again, to provide the extra kick that this deck really needs in Phase B. You can bring in 2 of them on cards in Phase C. However, to me, the Phase B one is more than enough just to give that little extra oomph as you move into Phase B. Now, Phase C supply for the Opel Blitz just seems way too long, and by the time you get to Phase C, well, you don't really need that supply, honestly. You just don't. Let's move on to the anti-tank. Now, with the anti-tank, you've got Panzerschrecks. You can get 2 squads of 2-star Panzerschrecks. These guys pretty much never miss. The Panzerschreck already has 10 accuracy, and with 2-star veterancy, yeah, like I said, they just don't miss very often at all. So I would bring in both cards of the Panzerschrecks, even if I'm not bringing them all in Phase A. It's just so that I can have them on the deck throughout the game. The Pak 36 is pretty vital, I guess. It's very cheap, 35 points. You can bring in all 3 of them at the start of the game, and they will cover you against half-tracks quite nicely. The only thing they struggle against is anything with slightly more armor, like light tanks. But generally, you can use these to ambush light tanks with the 300 meter range AT, like the rocket that you can put on it, the Stahlgranate 41 with the 20 AP. That only comes in at 300 meter range though, so be wary of that. You can also opt for a Pak 40, and basically I would suggest possibly switching out maybe one of the Panzerschreck squads for the Pak 40 in Phase A, because it can be very useful for picking off those, again, pesky half-tracks and light tanks. But I tend to just go for the Panzerschrecks and the Pak 36s and go for the ambush kind of gameplay when it comes to armor and half-tracks. Now moving into Phase B, you can opt for Pak 38s with the 10 AP value. However, I choose to go for the 3 Marder 2s with the 13 AP value and the mobile capability. I much prefer these guys. They also have 1200 meter range. It's actually extremely nice. Just don't get them one-popped. Just don't let them get into range of like enemy AT or enemy tanks with 1000 meter range. Just don't let it happen, because otherwise these things will die. They only have 3 front armor, 2 side and 1 rear armor. So yeah, just be very careful with these. They're very sort of vulnerable to enemy fire. They're even open top as well, so enemy infantry getting nearby them can just blow them up as well. You can, yeah, like I say, bring in Pak 38s. It's basically preference. Do you want an AT gun that's static, or do you want the mobile AT? And basically that's what the Marder gives you. Marder's a lot more expensive, so you've got to take that into account as well. As we move on to Phase C, taking the 3 Pak 40s is definitely necessary at this point. The 15 AP power is needed in order to take on the Phase C allied tanks, even Phase C Axis tanks if you're going to be playing Axis versus Axis. So yeah, Pak 40 just seems necessary in Phase C. 3 of them is actually quite nice for the card, so that's what I opt for in Phase C. Moving on to anti-air. Well, in Phase A, you can only get the flak 38 20mm, so I'm going to be bringing in the card of 3 of those, and that's just to provide some anti-air presence early on. Also, they can be used, because they're only 40 points, to provide fire support into enemy towns and so on, so that's a quite nice use for them. I don't have any Phase B AA, and the reason for that is because on this deck, in the air tab, we do have the Phase B ME-109s, like the fighters, and that's what I use for air supremacy in Phase B. But if we go back to the anti-air tab, in Phase C, however, I do have the flak Vierlings and the flak 36 88mm. Both of those, because they are 2-star veterancy, and with a command infantry squad, they can be 3-star veterancy, which is extremely potent. Like a 3-star flak 88 with the 16 AP power, so strong. So strong. So definitely worth bringing in both cards of those. And I have a card of the flak Vierlings. They have 12 HE power, only 800 meter range, but definitely provide even an AA sort of screen around your flak 88s, because the flak 88s, I mean, you don't want to get these killed by enemy airstrikes. So bring in both of them at the same time. I always recommend that with the flak 88s. And then have maybe the flak Vierlings ahead of them, so that they can cover them against those airstrikes. That's basically what my Phase C anti-air tab is about. Phase B, just not necessary due to the BF-109s. As for artillery, now this is a tab that I find varies quite a lot between players. I know that a lot of people have different opinions on the different units that you can bring in on the artillery tab of the Luftlande. In Phase A, I'm going to be choosing some mortars. although they're only 4 HE, they're only 40 points. So they can provide that extra morale damage onto enemy infantry quite nicely, and enemy like emplacements like AT weapons and MGs. 900 meter range kind of lets them down. You've got to keep them relatively close to your own infantry, but again, just extra fire support, extra morale damage. 40 points, can't really go wrong. Can maybe opt for a 120 point FK39, but I haven't really seen these being used very much at all. One thing I would definitely recommend, however, is the Phase A BEO Schwim, which is basically a forward observer car, which is going to be bringing in a 210mm off-map artillery barrage, which is extremely potent early game. Now, there was a time where I had both of these cards in the deck, but I find that I only really get around to using one of them in Phase A, so that's basically what I go for. And these are great for supporting your initial push in Phase A. Now, moving into Phase B, I have got one card of the SFH 396. These have 23 HE power with a range of 2,600 meters. Actually very potent long-range artillery. They also have an AT value or an AP value for shooting tanks at 1,000 meter range. So yeah, they can look after themselves as well as provide that very long-range HE support. Very nice sort of long-range RT for the mid-game. Now, you can get more of them in Phase C, however I just prefer to bring them in Phase B. And the FK39's more available in Phase B, don't really choose to bring them in. You can get an upgraded mortar in Phase B as well, however I don't feel it's very useful at that point. Then when it comes to Phase C, well, you got the 120mm mortar. This thing has 20 HE power and 1,600 meter range for 110 points. It's actually not a bad choice. 20 HE power is pretty damn potent for a mortar that does fire relatively quickly. If we look at like the SFH, for example, it has 4 rounds per minute. So I can definitely see why people would opt to bring in the 120mm mortar in Phase C. And I guess what you could do is maybe, if you don't use mortars in Phase A, bring in the mortars in Phase C instead. Now the Lorraine, that is another choice on this deck. 1,600 meter range, 27 HE power, self-propelled gun. Now this thing, it's okay. I find that it does just get itself killed. The range isn't long enough for it to be like super effective. It can blow up like enemy AT positions from safe range, and it can obviously like take out enemy infantry and so on from safe range. However, I just feel like it's just vulnerable. Like if it gets like an airstrike, like a rocket strike, a bomber can just come in and bomb it. And for 120 points, I don't really want to be losing these unnecessarily. But definitely a choice that I have seen a lot of people pick up on. So yeah, feel free to take it in your deck. I'm not saying it's bad by any means, but just not really my preference in playstyle. Moving on, you can obviously get more of the SFH 396s, like I already mentioned. But the main star of the show is the BEO Kubel with the railroad battery artillery of 380mm barrage. Can be brought in with this little Kubel. Who knew a Kubel had so much firepower? But railroad battery there, definitely going to do a lot of damage to whatever it hits. And in Phase C, it's definitely needed because by Phase C, you tend to be having issues with the 91st Luftlande unless you've already made yourself a quite nice defensive position. So yeah, I would definitely bring in at least one card of these. You can get 2 cards of them, but you're not really going to run through 2 cards of 3 artillery strikes each by the end of the game, I don't feel. Really up to you. Now if we move on to the air tab, this is where things get exciting for this deck. So in Phase A, you can actually get 2 ME-109s, so you can actually get 4 of them, 4 ME-109s with the 25mm rocket pods, and they are so useful for destroying pesky AT, pesky infantry squads, The only thing that's really going to counter this is maybe like 15th Scots with the Spitfires, for example. They can bring them out and shoot down these relatively simply. However, with 500 km/h speed, can maybe get away sometimes if they're a bit late to get those Spitfires in the air. But yeah, there you go. Bring in at least one card of the ME-109s in Phase A, because these can be extremely useful. 180 points though, quite expensive, so be wary of that. Don't bring in the recon and aircraft, again they're pretty useless in my opinion. The HS-129, however, this is a staple unit for Phase A in this deck. Definitely bring this in. It's so good. It basically allows you to get rid of pesky tanks, half-tracks, and even like the AVRE. If you side-shot an AVRE with this thing, it has 18 AP power on its main gun. It can definitely do some damage. And yeah, it costs 200 points, but that's a sacrifice sometimes worth making. The only thing I'd be wary of is like enemy aircraft. Will shoot it down very easily. It only has 400 km/h speed, so it's not going to be escaping very fast. Make sure you have the air under your control before bringing these in. You can risk bringing these in early on to maybe take out an AVRE. You take out like an AVRE and a Honey Stewart, for example, from the 15 Scots, then you've already paid yourself off with this. So that can work out in your favour. However, if you get it shot down and you don't get a kill, then you're going to be in a pretty bad place. Then moving on, we have in Phase B the ME-109 G6R6s. I have 2 cards of these. Keeping air supremacy with this deck is vital. So having 4 BF or ME-109s in this case, it's definitely important. And they have very good agility with 550 km/h speed. They can basically take on everything in the sky. And just don't bring them in on their own and let them get shot down. Bring them in like at least pairs, if not 3 of them at the same time, just to cover off the skies. And then when you're starting to save points for the other HS-129s and the JU-88s, you can really start to do some damage. So some people like to bring in the FW-190s, but these ones are terrible, the G3 variant with the 4 5 HE power bombs. They're just absolutely abysmal. You can bring in the upvetted version as well in Phase B. And the only thing that I can see that these would be useful for is like shooting down enemy aircraft, honestly, as opposed to actually bombing anything. So that's what you'd tend to use them for. But I just find the ME-109s a lot more reliable for that purpose because they don't have enough agility. The FW-190 doesn't have enough agility. Yeah, they're a bit more resilient, but that doesn't really matter. As soon as a plane's on your tail, you're going to get shot down. So, moving on into Phase B, we have the HS-129s. Yeah, make sure you bring in both cards of these. Like, having 4 HS-129s at your whim is just going to be, like, so good. Like, these things can bust open any tank that the Allies can throw at you. Even Axis can throw at you, again, if you're playing Axis versus Axis. I don't bring in any bombers in Phase B, like the JU-88s, for example. Just I wait till Phase C when I bring in the JU-88 with the 2 500 kilogram bombs with 25 HE power. Just really fantastic at like blowing up convoys, blowing up like enemy AT positions or enemy hard positions. Definitely something to consider. You can obviously get like 6 of these bombers on the deck, and if you move things around a bit, like say if you prefer bombers, you can maybe drop a HS-129 to bring in another JU-88. Something that I used to do for a while, but I just found that like having the extra HS-129s was just so good against enemy armor, which you really struggle against in the late game with this deck. So that's why I tend to opt to go for the 2 cards of the HS-129s. Then you can get 5 of them overall. And that's basically my deck. So if we just talk over like how things complement each other in the early game, what you really want to be doing is using your early game recon unit, so maybe a unit of Speertroop, maybe a couple of units of Panzer Abwehrs, to get into some really nice positions. You want to be taking the front line with the Ersatztruppen, supported by the Fallschirmjäger and the MG-34s. That's generally quite a potent combination. You can get like a 4 squads maybe of Ersatztruppen with a squad of Fallschirmjäger for 60 points, then maybe back them up with a couple of squads of Fallschirmjäger instead of MG34s. Basically, it's a choice. Maybe you go for 1 MG34 and a Fallschirmjäger, 2 Fallschirmjägers, 2 MG34s. It's really up to you. I definitely recommend bringing in at least 1 Fallschirmjäger at the start of the game, however, as they are just incredibly potent against enemy that gets caught out in the open. Bringing in more than that can be quite risky because they're quite expensive squads, but it's really up to you. You want to be supporting these with maybe like the cheap Panzer 35. You could got the Kubel munitions there if the FG-42s run out of ammunition. These Panzerschreck squads, very useful. If you don't want to splash out too much on Panzerabwehrs, you can bring in a Panzerschreck squad. They are still 2-star veterans, so you don't forget. So they are very useful, and you want to be bringing in all 3 of the Pak 36s at the start of the game, always. Because this is the reason that you don't get overrun by half-tracks and light armour early game. You can also opt to bring in a Flak 38 to support your infantry push, and I would sometimes recommend also bringing in the Schwimmwagen with the off-map artillery at the start of the game as well, just because it is very, very potent for destroying enemy infantry if they get caught out again in the open. Also, just like if you're bogged down in like a factory fight at Colin Bell, these Schwimmwagens can really turn those fights in your favour and allow your Fallschirmjäger to just run all over the enemy. It's very, very satisfying sometimes. Furthermore, saving some points in Phase A can allow you access to the ME-109 and the HS-129, which are useful again in certain situations. ME-109, great for taking out AT guns and infantry squads. HS-129, great for taking out enemy armour if it's really becoming an issue for you. However, do not let it get shot down by enemy fighters, otherwise that's just pretty tragic. And yeah, that's basically it. So you want to just be moving forwards early on with your infantry, try and get a really strong presence with your Fallschirmjägers. Then in Phase B, back that up with maybe the Stugs and the Stür 42. And from there, you just want to get yourself into a nice, decent defensive position, backed up by your Flak 88s and AA net. And hopefully, by then you should be able to hold the line, as moving into Phase C is incredibly rough for this deck. But as long as you maintain air supremacy, you should be able to do quite a lot of damage with HS-129s and the Ju-88s. Those Ju-88s are perfect for breaking through an AA net, by the way. If you are struggling with AA, maybe taking your fighters out the sky, Ju-88s can blow up that AA. They can take a lot of damage before they're forced to fall back. But either way, guys, that's all for now. So hopefully you've enjoyed this one. I know that you guys have a lot of mixed opinions on this deck, and I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think are decent in this deck. But in the meantime, that's all. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.